Thank you. Please. Thank you. I am acutely aware of the fact that I was not your first choice. And I will hold that against you. I'm going to give that up for Lent. We're here to talk about legacy today. And I have to just say to you that as I look over this audience, in the context of the reality of what we face as a church right now, both nationally and internationally, it does my heart good to see you take a Saturday from your lives to contemplate what you're going to do, what you're going to build now for the future. And that's why I want to talk with you about this a little bit and underscore the importance of legacies. You know, I think that when I was at a priest convocation many years ago, the conductor of the convocation, and this was, well, anyway, I won't say anything about that, but he was talking and he got a question about clerical garb. Do we have to wear clerical garb? There's a bunch of priests talking with priests. Do we have to really wear clerical garb? And the conductor of the thing said, you know, I have great sympathy for the fact that we don't want to do this. You know, I mean, after all, I don't want hand-me-downs. That was the way he looked at it. I thought about that. And of course, you always get to ask questions. So I put my hand up and I said, Father, could you just, there I am sitting, by the way, in my collar. I said, Father, could you just explain to us the difference between a hand-me-down and an heirloom? And I hadn't really ever thought about it that way before, but when he said it the way he said it, and I thought, why do I wear a Roman collar? I don't wear a Roman collar when I go to the beach, but then I don't go to the beach very much. I thought the difference between a hand-me-down is something that is not useful, is not attractive, has no meaning. And an heirloom may not get a lot of money on a market, but has great significance, great meaning because of what is attached to it, the memories that are attached to it, most particularly the person who left it for you. And I think that's what we're considering here today. When we talk about legacy, we could point to many, many legacies that people have left us on the personal level, but even on the grand level. I mean, think about it. I can't imagine how many of us are here today because of the legacy of penicillin. The man who invented penicillin, we owe our lives to. And do you know, we don't even know his name, do you? There may be some doctor here who knows his name. His name, and I had to look it up. Thank God for Google sometimes. Alexander Fleming. Only 1928, by the way. How many of us would have been long ago wiped out from a simple little infection? And by the way, penicillin was discovered or invented by mistake. It was this mold growing that had to do with something else that was going on, and then it's, of course, been refined, and we have the whole field of antibiotics, which we can be grateful for. In the financial area, I don't know whether these are good legacies or not, but the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, large foundations that have built libraries and hospitals. So you can leave a financial legacy, scientific legacy. I'm thinking of Thomas Edison. Boy, here's a man who left a lot of legacies. Here's a man who gave us electrical power generation, the capacity to do that, which of course bled off into a whole bunch of other things, including motion pictures. I'm not sure we're grateful for that. Mass communications, I'm not sure we're grateful for that. Light bulbs, I'm grateful for that. Think of legacies that are left to us in literature. Of course, immediately what comes to my mind as a former literature major, English major, is Shakespeare. Or Dante, the great epic poem, La Divina Commedia. And then, personally, my favorite, the indoor flushing toilet. 1596, Sir John Harington made it for the Queen of England. I want to propose to you to think about the legacy that was left by Michelangelo. Michelangelo was the great Renaissance artist, multi-talented, not just an artist, not just a muralist, not just a sculptor, but an architect as well. And the legacy I want to focus a little bit on today is the legacy of St. Peter's Basilica. On Holy Thursday of this year, on April 18th, we will celebrate, we're going to celebrate Holy Thursday, but we will at least commemorate, or it will be marked as the 513th anniversary of Pope Julius's commission to rebuild St. Peter's Basilica. I don't know if you know the history of St. Peter's, but St. Peter was killed in Rome. He was crucified upside down in the Circus of Nero, which was just adjacent to the Vatican Hill. The Vatican Hill existed before St. Peter's Basilica, right? It was a Roman cemetery, largely. And he was crucified in the middle of that circus, which is, where the chariot races went on, right in the middle of it, at the foot of the Egyptian obelisk that stood there, that, by the way, now stands in the center of St. Peter's Cathedral, St. Peter's Piazza. And when he died, they chopped his feet off because they didn't want to bother pulling him down from the upside-down cross. And they just dragged his body a little ways away, not more than probably 500 feet away, into a shallow grave and just threw things on top of it. Christians in Rome at that time venerated that spot from that moment on. Now, the church was under persecution, especially under Nero, but even for centuries thereafter, and it wasn't until the 4th century, the first Christian emperor, Constantine, decided to honor St. Peter. Now, they had thrown a lot of things on that site. Christians would come and tend to it. They eventually built a little kind of memorial above it, and this was a venerated place, and Constantine knew the tradition of where the body of Peter was built, and he decided to honor Peter's legacy by building St. Peter's Basilica. This is the first St. Peter's Basilica. And he built it, as I say, in the 4th century. And that lasted 1,100 years until Pope Julius came along. The Avignon popes had existed. The basilica itself had begun to crumble after 1,100 years. And they finally decided, we're going to take all of this down and we're going to build a new basilica. Now, among the architects, because there were probably 6 or 7 different architects who were involved in this, Michelangelo's name stands out. And I think he's worth thinking about, because when we think of the legacy of St. Peter's Basilica, we automatically think, unless you're an art history major, we think about Michelangelo. His genius, his style, his tenacity. He didn't want to build St. Peter's. He said, quote, "I undertake this only for the love of God and to honor the apostle." When you read the history of what Michelangelo did and how he did it and what the process was like as he went through this whole thing, what's very instructive about Michelangelo was that he didn't do it alone. He built on the work of many of these other architects who had come before him, sometimes altering, sometimes augmenting, sometimes leaving in place and then adding to their insight, their own capacities. You see by the quote that I just gave you from Michelangelo is he was detached from this. He was doing this for something more than this. He was doing it for the love of God and to honor St. Peter. He also did this by virtue of his own capacity, his own genius in the sense of art and architecture and all of the things that go into constructing an edifice of that size. That is to say that the way in which he did this beautiful thing was to study geometry, was to understand his work. His work was a vocation for him. He didn't detach his work from his calling from God. One of the sublime ways in which he could express his vocation was precisely through his work. Think of this too. As he was doing this and other works of art in Rome at the behest of the Pope, very often being prodded, he suffered envy and rejection and ridicule. You could even say persecution from other people around, from other artists who were envious of his genius and of his contacts with the Pope, who didn't always pay his bills on time, by the way. You have lots of letters of Michelangelo complaining that the Pope hasn't paid the latest invoice. And also ridicule. There's a famous story of Michelangelo. This was when he was working on the Sistine Chapel, which is just adjacent to where the basilica now stands. And he was working up on the Sistine Chapel. He had completed, or almost completed, the beautiful Last Judgment. You know that great Last Judgment of Christ coming, judging the world, Our Lady right at his side, helping the souls come out of purgatory. And you see all of the saints and the apostles and the martyrs. And then at the bottom, you see hell. You see these souls suffering in hell. This wasn't quite done yet. But as Michelangelo was up on a scaffolding at the top of the Sistine Chapel, a cardinal came through. He wasn't supposed to, but he came through and he looked over the color, the immense, striking color of this chapel, which wasn't anything like. This is the Renaissance. This is a change from the older style. And he didn't realize Michelangelo was up there, and he remarked to his companion, "Oh, but this is more appropriate for a bathhouse than it is for the chapel of the Pope." And he sauntered on out. Michelangelo looked down and saw who it was, shimmied down from his scaffolding, and went over into this part of the bottom, and you can see it to this day, of the Last Judgment, where there is a boat with Satan, and painted onto that boat being brought to hell the picture of that cardinal. And just to add the final flourish, there is a snake winding around this man's legs and biting him somewhere unpleasant. It's in the chapel of the Pope. Well, when they opened that chapel up for the city, the Romans to see, and it was complete, the cardinal came through with his entourage and was looking at all of this, and pretty soon his eye fell upon that corner of the Last Judgment, and he immediately recognized his face. Of course, everybody standing around knew who it was. And he sauntered over to the Pope, and he said, Holy Father, Michelangelo has put me in hell. Order him to take me out. And the Pope said, Mi dispiace, Cardinale. I'm so sorry, Your Eminence. Were it purgatory, I would have something to say about it. But as it is hell, there's nothing I can do. And so there he stands for all eternity in great pain. So this tells you that Michelangelo could take the brunt of criticism and misunderstanding and ridicule and turn it into something good. There is, however, a danger in contemplating one's legacy. And I want to underscore this because I think it's very, very important. It's kind of the daydreaming. I'm going to think about my legacy. And what you end up thinking about is yourself. Or what you end up thinking about is what everybody is going to say about you and how you're going to be their reference point. Here's the harsh truth of a legacy. You're not going to be around to see it. Your legacy no longer will contain you. It will contain the effects of you. So if you're planning a legacy, you have to plan a legacy that has some momentum to it. And what's the best way in which we can do that? It's the contemplation on the truth of things. What is real? Because what is real and what is true is what will endure. In other words, you have to have this sense of detachment that Michelangelo indicates. I'm doing it for the love of God. I'm doing it because I'm concerned with the truth. And then let it go. Give it a good shove, but let it go. So that the preoccupation isn't so much on the legacy as it is on our life. The quality of our life, the way in which our life corresponds to the truth, the way in which our life is a life of giving away ourselves rather than attempting to conserve ourselves and others' opinions of us. My brothers, your primary vocation is your family. If you are not sanctified within your family, you are not sanctified. You ask any priest who hears confessions, and they're all going to tell you that the most common context in which sin arises in people's lives is in the context of the family. The irritations that children bring to a home, or that spouses bring to one another, or that extended family brings, or the pressures of supporting a family, maintaining a family, forming a family, all of the things having to do with the fidelity to the vocation of one's family. That, for the vast majority of you, is your first and primary vocation. It's the place in which you will discover God's calling to you. And the second most common place for you to discover your sanctity is your work. Like St. Joseph, the worker. That's your vocation as men. It's what a man wants to do, is to go out and kill the beast and bring it home for the family. The protection of the family, the sustenance of the family. And it is not just a utilitarian function. Your work is not just to get the paycheck. It's the work itself that is critical and important. I've made a number of architectural references in the course of this talk this afternoon. There's one more architectural reference I'm very fond of, and I cite it very often when I'm giving lectures in various places, and especially in seminaries. It comes from a great philosopher, a French philosopher by the name of Etienne Gilson. He said, if you want to build a cathedral, we have in our minds now St. Peter's, but he was referring to, of course, Notre Dame, which isn't to be confused with the little school to the south of us. I confess, I'm a Trojan, so I say the rosary against Notre Dame when they're playing. And as you've noticed, Our Lady often listens to me. It's a different topic. I'm sorry, that's dangerous to say in Michigan. But he was referring to Notre Dame, and he said, if you want to build a facade like that of Notre Dame that represents the rising of the soul to God, that's what the medieval cathedrals were built on. If you want to do that, you must first understand geometry. Without nature, he said, it is impossible to make use, without the study of science and geometry, it is impossible to make use of nature for the glory of God. He said, if you want to build a cathedral that represents the rising of the soul to God, you must take it as your first aim that the thing to do is to know the subject first. Know your work first. Engage your work first. He said, piety is never a substitute for technique. For without technique, piety is helpless to make use of nature for the glory of God. Your work next to your family is the most normative way in which you're going to discover your vocation. Within the work, because it is where you touch the world. It is where you leave your imprint upon the world. Your work is a sacred vocation by which you sanctify yourself and you sanctify the world. Prayer, of course, is essential to this, because what prayer does is lift us out of the immediate. Prayer lifts us out of the urgent and gets us to focus on what is eternal, what is truly important. It helps us to prioritize our lives, because one of the greatest mistakes we make in life is thinking that the most urgent thing, the next email that's popped onto our phone, is that's the thing I've got to do right now. And prayer lets us observe the dust settling and then be able to pull from that what is truly critical, crucial, important. St. Peter's Basilica was consecrated in 1626. It is considered the most renowned church in all of Renaissance architecture. It is, you may know, the largest church in the world. Millions upon millions visit St. Peter's Basilica every year. It is one of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It was consecrated, as I say, in 1626. Michelangelo died in 1564, which is to say that Michelangelo never saw St. Peter's Basilica. That is a legacy. The question for you to confront today is what kind of legacy you are now building. And are you building it with that kind of a vision that will go well beyond you? And the place you start to build that vocation is in your family and in your work, in your business. Because unless you do it there, it will not be done. Jesus Christ is Emmanuel, God with us. And if he is not in our homes with us, if he is not on the New York Stock Exchange with us, if he is not in our schools and in our kitchens and in our workshops and in front of our computer screens with us, then he is not Emmanuel, and there is no God with us. But you can acknowledge this presence of God with you, in your home, in your work, in the architecture that you are now constructing, that you are detached from, and that is the result of your work and the collaboration that you engage with other people. Remember always, piety is never a substitute for technique. Perfect the technique, and you will encounter true piety. God bless you. Thank you for your attention.